I'm a bit behind on my reading for book reviews because I spent all weekend at. So, we are getting the second installment today of Worldbuilding Rants, or maybe it's the third if you count the steampunk bitching. So today I have a problem with space opera and that general technological genre of sci-fi stories. How does the money work? No, no, seriously. How does money work across multiple planets? Now, let me first rule out the one way it does work, which is if you have Ansible communication, which is instantaneous data transfers from one planet to the next, you can recreate a modern monetary system. Fine. Now, the problem becomes when that doesn't exist. Now, let me first talk about what is money. Money is a means of communicating through society, basically, a distribution of goods and services based on work put in. Now, don't get in my pants about all the ways that goes wrong. There are obviously exploits and issues and errors and general stuff. You know what I'm talking about. But theoretically, in a perfect society, money is how you evaluate who has contributed and what do they get for their contributions. And notably, it needs to be of a small denomination to be currency, for the record. Small enough that you can actually buy things you need. And it has to be fungible. $5 to me is $5 to use, $5 to the next guy, and so on. And limited in supply. That last one is the issue. Now, there are three major categories of money, and they can be classified as hard assets, fiat, and crypto, for how I'm going to be discussing about this. And by the way, as I've said before, I am an engineer and a writer. I'm not an economist. I am doing my best here, and I want you all to take this as a challenge when you look at stories, and you want to think about what does an actual restriction of real logic do to improve a story, or does it just get in the way? Because honestly, in a lot of ways, like language issues, they just get in the way. It is hard to write a story where not being able to communicate across languages enriches this. And so there's a reason most people ignore it. Similarly, there's a reason that most people just say, "Oh, it's science fiction." They use credits. There's universal credits, my dude. And maybe that's the solution. Because explaining something more nuanced takes time, and books have a limited amount of time and attention from the reader, and not everyone's going to be. But this is world building rants, okay? Now, hard assets will never work in a science fiction setting, in my opinion. And that is because you cannot actually control the monetary supply. And I'm going to have to go on a tangent to explain that. Because basically, if you don't already know what a monetary supply is, turn off this video after hitting like and subscribe and maybe buying my book, and pull up an actual economist lecture on what the monetary supply is, because most people don't understand what a monetary supply is, because it's the pool of money in the economic circulation, basically. And once you understand what a monetary supply is, you'll probably understand how the Fed and the federal government are conspiring to rob you of everything that you've earned through manipulating the monetary supply and causing inflation to pay off the debts that they just are creating, Ponzi schemes for boomers. Now, in an ideal economy, you actually do want your monetary supply to be growing if population and productivity are growing. Because you actually want things to be flowing. You want the prices to be predictable over time for consumers. And that's how people can communicate and function and make decisions accurately. If you start ending up with, say, 40% inflation, people don't know what's going to come. They're going to bunker down. They're going to be conservative. And then that's going to just throw dirt in the gears of the economy, and everything's going to break. Now, so I hope you'll just trust me that society wants a controlled monetary supply. So, for example, if you were to base it on gold, that system would fall apart as soon as someone shows up with a giant asteroid of several thousand tons of gold, which you can find in space. Non-radioactive elements simply aren't that rare on a universal scale. Now, obviously, the small elements like hydrogen, helium, lithium, etc., are really common in space. But like at the scale that humans function, gold, even silver, all the precious elements that don't decay, everything until lead is not actually that rare. And they can be found in space and pulled in almost unpredictably because it's a question of like scanning capacity. You won't be able to predict when someone's going to go, holy crap, I found 1 billion pounds of rudidium. Good luck to the hard asset speculators of the future because it's not going to make sense. Now, so here I'm talking about like hard elements aren't going to be a functional currency, even though gold has worked through all of human history and still works better than other currencies. Maybe there is a molecule. Maybe there is a synthesized material that can be used. But if you can synthesize it and you're talking about it as like a molecule as the material, you can counterfeit that, which means that you don't have control over the monetary supply. If it's I've heard of stories that use radioactive isotopes or exotic matter to try and make up for this. But that actually goes, in my opinion, too far, where it becomes too hard to increase the monetary supply. Because, like I said, if your population is growing, you're getting more productive, you actually want more monetary supply so that people aren't fighting over the assets, and it's not going to become this generational conflict between the people that were alive earlier during the smaller population period are clinging on to money unfairly against the larger, younger generation. You need more money in circulation. You can have a hard asset such as trade goods. I'll come back to that. Fiat, to jump over to fiat, basically relies on a centralized government or the equivalent of. If you really get down to it, you will end up redefining government as that body which governs the monetary supply. And you will get into questions of communication frequency between planets. If there is no communication from planet to planet, and it takes, say, 10 years to get from one to the other, you won't be able to balance fiat ledger books. Particularly if there isn't a back and forth, because you'll end up having to treat every planet as a different country in like an open market, basically. And if one planet is sending, say, let's say, food to another planet, because you've got Trantor from Foundation is just consuming food in exchange for providing the service of bureaucracy. Trantor is sending money out. Which means if Trantor can't infinitely fabricate money, Trantor is going to run out of that money because no one is sending them money for something that they're giving unless you are somehow extracting taxes out of them, right? Which is, I guess, one way to do it. But on an interplanetary scale, how are you going to tax fiat currency? How are you going to stop a planet from just decoupling and recalculating their stuff because they realize you slapped a 10% tariff on them and suddenly they're bleeding money and don't have control over their own monetary supply, which, things like that happen all the time in recent history. Ever since we got off the gold standard, you start looking at like South America and such, when these countries just end up not being able to balance their country's cash flow. It's going to happen again on an interplanetary scale. And you know what? I guess that brings me back to the general issue of, the average writer working on, say, a Star Wars knockoff or something. Do they have the time to research and understand this? Because I would have to research and really understand how international monetary firms can bankrupt companies, even though it's something that's happened. It's something that I could research. That's a lot of effort for me to understand, to break down into a written form. But I know enough that I would say, at my rule of thumb, if you don't have instantaneous communication and travel is fast enough to be done, but it like other than generation ships. If you're talking about generation ships to get from one to the other, you're just not sending money. There would be no purpose. The only reason you would need a monetary system between planets is if there was trade going back and forth. So that just gets into the question of, well, if that is what's happening, because, it's galactic space, everyone is using credits. As soon as war breaks out and the government stops being able to control tax collection and stops being able to protect trade routes, boom, instantaneously, that currency is no longer going to matter. And the economy and the endangered planet is going to devolve into basically ammo and food. I don't see a way around that, and I actually view that as an interesting issue that characters may have to face in the context of interplanetary war, which could be a lot more interesting than just going, Lamau, man, well, interplanetary war, you just drop rocks on them, don't you know? Because if you're talking about an economic collapse because of this loss of trade between planets, that actually comes down to a character level, that's where stories are supposed to be. It's a little reductive if you're telling interplanetary war and the only decisions that matter are the ones that impact whether an asteroid impacts the planet and blows it up. Doesn't mean that's a bad premise to work with. Link in the description. And the third category of types of money should be like obvious why it doesn't work. Crypto and a blockchain doesn't work across planets if it takes years to send a signal. Blockchains are not efficient. And that's by design, because there are certain things that you don't want to be done efficiently. Because you want them to be done securely, basically. And you would never be able to resolve a transaction if you need to spend years sending data one way and then sending the data back to confirm the authenticity of the data. Basically, go find a crypto channel to explain the blockchain and ask them what would happen if if sending a data signal required the Pony Express. Maybe they can help you explain that in greater detail, or you can just take my word for it. Crypto will not work if you don't have instantaneous communication. I'm not even sure it would work between Earth and Mars. Like, there might be periods of the year where Earth and Mars are close enough to each other that it would work, and then not, like, it just breaks down otherwise because of latency. Like, even today with Bitcoin, you can hit these transaction spikes where it takes weeks to complete a transfer. You can't run an economy if it takes that long to finish a transaction. Simple as, man. So, in the event that you have planets concentrated with each other without instantaneous communication, but you can get back and forth, something like you're all on a bunch of islands and an ocean with sailing ships between them, you can have an economy running as long as there isn't war. As long as people are actually cooperating. In fact, I would say that for that technological setup, you're actually going to see a re-emergence of mercantile guilds. Because what will have to happen is anyone trying to bounce around, like, say, the Serenity from Firefly that's trying to do independent business or smuggling, they need to be able to show up to a planet and say that they have so much credit because they'll be backed by an organization that does have that much credit, and then that organization will authenticate, say, oh yeah, the captain of the ship has this much leeway until we confirm and do balance our books as much as we can and see what their personal budget actually is, and then we're going to update that throughout the planets. But because he needs to do business as soon as he lands, we are backing his word. Just like a credit card company backs your word when you charge your card. It's going to have to work like that, in my opinion, if it takes time to get data signals back and forth. But that does allow for a form of fiat system to work. Or you could end up on certain hard assets might work. You'll get into really weird issues of like purchasing power. Like, for example, in my space opera-esque setting, starships need specific fuel to go faster than light to get from planet to planet, and I treat that like petroleum is treated in the modern day. And obviously, The U.S. and the world runs off the petrodollar. We don't strictly say, 1 barrel of oil costs $100, simple as, but it's really close to that. Maybe not $100. I haven't checked what the price of a barrel of oil is, but beside the point. If you have, say, a spacing guild like from Dune that controls the faster than light fuel, they will probably naturally get into a monopoly if the government lets them. And all of a sudden, they would become the ones setting the price standard. Because keep in mind, another thing to think about a currency is the actual numerical value doesn't really matter. A US dollar is not a intrinsically better currency than yen, just because 1 US dollar gets me, well, at this point, nothing. But a tenner can get me a meal at a fast food place, whereas I would need 1,000 yen to get a meal at a fast food place. One is not intrinsically better than the other just because they have one has a couple extra zeros, like they're trying to avoid a trademark or something. So hard assets backed by guilds would allow other mercantile guilds to have identified traders, such that they can actually get lines of credit to function when they're jumping between planets. That might work, but that would, however, cause huge swings in purchasing power, because if you look at, say, modern day energy production, there is a reason that Germans are currently going to be freezing to death because they can't afford their gas bills, but Russians who produce the gas don't even think about how much they pay for it because they have it. They're the ones taking the profit by transporting it to Germany. So that would naturally mean that the purchasing power near the, let's call it a refinery for the FTL fuel, is going to be significantly wealthier than a more rural backwater planet. And maybe that's a good thing. That's kind of interesting. That becomes a reason that there is a disparity from one location to the next. That wouldn't just be because, there's taxes and regulations on this planet, and this planet's a slavehold or whatever. It makes sense. No one becomes at fault. That's just the nature of the system that the people are using because they think it is the most efficient system that will benefit some people and penalize other people. Maybe that's all right. I believe there is at least one setting that I can't name, and if you can, please drop the name of this series in the comments below. But I have seen the idea that the fundamental unit of value pegged to the currency, which is supposed to be the exchange, is actually food calories, which might make quite a bit of sense, actually. If you say that, a human needs 2,000 calories to survive, therefore, we're just going to say that that's $100, 100 double dollars or something. So that someone getting paid on perhaps a government or a union contract or something knows that they're getting at least 100 double dollars to cover their food, that they will be able to survive their food, and then more on top to handle their rent and expenses and saving up and so on or whatever. Because that actually becomes a fungible thing that will vary from place to place, but every human is going to need, because humans are the underlying common denominator, the common element of the economies. So if you can tie the money to a biological need, and you assume that humans aren't vastly changing from planet to planet, you might be able to make a hard asset currency backed like that, where you have a bank that just says, we're trading in these yen dollars or whatever you want to call them, and we are actually going to be functioning as a food exchange. If you show up with these currencies, we will back it with food. It may be good, but it will keep you alive and fed, and it'll be spaceship rations, right? Maybe that could work. I'm not going to sit here and fully think that out, because this is an invite to authors out there to put some real thought into how does the monetary system work between planets like that. There are consequences, and those consequences can be really interesting. So I say. Now, I've lifted this a few times because I'm trying to sell books, my dude. The link is in the description below. Please drop a like, comment, YouTube things. Till then, I hope you enjoyed this world building rant. Cheers.